This program is brought to you by Emory University.
Thank you all for coming. As you probably read from the invite, Sister Pat Murphy and Sister Joanne Persh have been doing work with vulnerable populations in the Chicago area for the past 45 years. A lot of their work has focused on immigrant populations. And their successes and their efforts are far more expansive than I can provide here. But I think that there are a couple of things that would be of particular interest to those of you who are gathered today. The first is that they were the founders of the Sukasa Catholic Worker House, which was a house that provided counseling and a place to stay for people who experienced torture in Central America during the fighting that went on there in the 1980s and early 90s. And the second thing of particular interest is that they were instrumental in passing the Access to Religious Ministry Act in 2008, which guarantees religious workers access to county jails where immigrant detainees are being held in the state of Illinois. It's the first legislation of its kind in the country, and really is sort of a coup in getting more people into the immigrant detention system, those from the outside, and getting access to immigrant detainees who are often very effectively walled off from outside support. So with that, I will turn it over to the sisters. They're going to give us just some background on their work, their motivation, how their faith interacts with their drive to change public policy. But we're going to leave a lot of time for question and answer. So we encourage you to be thinking of things that you would like to know. So thank you very much for joining us.
Oh, it's wonderful to be here. We always enjoy being with students and professors, and thank you for having us. You might notice I have a cast on my hand, and my family and friends half jokingly say, "Who have you been fighting with now?" And I say half jokingly because they know that Pat and I are fighters, but we're not fighters with our wrist. We don't use violence, but we fight with our spirit. And we have a motto that seems to be becoming kind of well known. And that motto is that we do things peacefully and respectfully, but we never take no for an answer. And that's kind of how we got to where we are now. We formed the group, the Interfaith Committee for Detained Immigrants. There's some brochures and newsletters on the table. You're welcome to take them. We're now a corporation. We're a 501c3, but this all started in January of 2007 when we heard about a lawyer. And that lawyer was an immigration lawyer, and he was very frustrated because of all these laws. He wasn't winning his cases. And he thought, maybe if I prayed, it would help. So his plan was to stand outside the deportation center on the first Friday of the month. So in January of 2007, Pat and I heard about him. We didn't know him. And we thought, well, let's go and join him. And we say it was the coldest day we've ever had in Chicago, really. And there we were, the three of us, standing outside this center praying. But while we stood there, we saw what was happening. The buses, the vans, bringing people to be processed, taking the people who were in the jails to be deported. And they had no control over that. And so we said, what is our country doing here? We saw families running in, trying to bring a bag, running out because they didn't have the right stuff or they had too much or not the right papers. And we said, no, this is wrong. We have to be here every Friday. And Roy Berg, the lawyer, who's a good friend now, didn't know that. So for a while it was the two of us standing there singing and praying. And then when Roy heard we were doing that, he came every week, and everywhere we went, we told that story. And now we have 30 to 50 people there every week, often student groups in the city for some kind of an experience from many parts of the country. So the vigil goes on every Friday at 7:15, and a week ago Friday, our Senator Durbin joined us, and because he did, then our field officer from ICE joined us, and his boss from Washington joined us, and all the officers inside there, and they all stood very politely while we prayed. And so, hello, welcome. We prayed our vigil with all of those people in attendance. But then we realized if we're so traumatized by watching this and then starting to talk to families, imagine what those people inside must feel like. And they deserve to have someone support them at this moment. And we were really naive at the time, and so we went up there and said, we want to come in and pray with the people being deported, talk with them, offer comfort. Guess what they said? You can't come in here. Well, you know our motto, we don't take no for an answer. So then we're trying to contact the ICE director and no response. We send a certified letter. Finally, then a deputy called us and said, we don't need you. We have standards. Everything is fine. I said, but we can't validate that by what we hear. So he said, well, don't tell them that I told you, but go to the jail. So we did, 2 hours from our house. And what do you think they told us? No, we don't need you. We've got all these wonderful programs here. But none of them were for the immigrant. They were in English. They weren't about their needs. So, but we were able to get in the court. We said, well, let's go to the court. And we sat there, and now we have a court watch program. We have someone in immigration court every day with their court watch button, makes the judge sit up a little taller, helps the families that come. Often now our folks in the jail ask if we'll be there, but they know we're there. One of our faithful court watchers, Father Jim Hoffman, one day we take notes, and now we're connecting with Ayla, who processes what we learn in the court. And the prosecutor said to Jim, hey, Mr. Court Watch man, are you going to write nice things about me today? So they know what we're doing. But remember our motto, and we wanted to get in that jail, and they kept saying no. So we're working on getting in Broadview, getting in the jail simultaneously. Nothing was working. We spoke to a congressional caucus, men running for Congress for Illinois, and Pat and I each had a little piece about violation of human and civil rights. And when she asked them, would you come in the jail with us? Would you work to make things better? Oh, we're not for Guantanamo. They had no idea what we were talking about, and they're running for us for Congress. So the Illinois Coalition on Immigrant and Refugee Rights said, this is wrong. So they wrote the bill, and they made us the face of the bill, but they gathered a group of all faiths around us anytime we were down there. So the legislators knew this was not a Catholic issue, but a faith issue. And so, as you said, it took a lot of lobbying. We were down Springfield sometimes 2-3 times a week. We'd just get home and they'd call, you got to be there tomorrow. We've got these appointments. So on November 20th, 2008, when we were in a van on our way to Georgia for the SOA, we started getting calls. The bill passed unanimously in the Senate. It had passed unanimously in the House. And so we thought, great, we've been training people. We got all these volunteers, but they still wouldn't let us in the jail. And so the state rep had to come down there and help us. And it took till January of 2010. But now every Tuesday, Pat and I go. But we have teams, team 1, 2, 3, 4, for each week of the month. And they come once a month. There are 15 besides us. We have contact visits. People sign up to come to see us. Even if their family comes in that jail, they only see them on televideo. So we're really the only humans that they see that don't have a gun and all kind of stuff on their belt. So it's been a real gift to us and to them. And you want to follow up with Broadview? Because we didn't stop there.
Because, again, we never take no for an answer. We didn't give up on Broadview where we began. We did get into the jail first, but we went back to Broadview. That's kind of a tight place because it is a place of deportation. But we strongly felt that it was human and religious rights, that we had the right to provide those rights pastorally. And so we work very closely, actually, with the Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights, and they help us very often, and particularly with the community organizing. But they then had talked to us, and we agreed then to lay down in front of the buses on their way to the airport on Friday. And again, we were going to do that because we felt that their rights were being violated. Well, as this happened, before the action really took place, it hit the newspapers that, I'll quote, that these two spry elderly nuns were going to lay down in front of the buses. Well, that actually got not only in the Chicago press, but it got to Washington, D.C., and they didn't want that to happen. And so on the head of it, Mr. Wong, who is the enforcement and removal officer, isn't that a real great title? And anyway, he called and he said he would like to negotiate over this. So we said we would be certainly willing to negotiate. And so the negotiation wound up being that we could board the buses at the time that they would be leaving, and we could get on and pray. So again, that's what happened. We said that was okay. So that was our first step, and we felt that it was a pretty important one, and it was critical. So we did get on the buses at that time, and we did have information too that we could give those who were going to Mexico. Actually, what happens, the flight, their bus to, at that time, to O'Hare Field, the flight was to Harlingen, Texas. And in Harlingen, Texas, then those who were going into Mexico would cross into Matamoros. Those going on to Central America would continue on to Oakdale, Louisiana, and remain there for about a week. So we gave both of the groups little slips of paper which would say what was going to happen to them when they crossed the border. In Mexico, there were houses of hospitality, and they were safe houses, and they would have food and so on. So that was the effort then. And we did get on the buses. I might just explain, we thought we'd get on the bus and, walk down the aisle and wish them, tell them we were sorry and what would be happening to them. Not so. We boarded the bus and there was just a little space and plexiglass and a cage, and there would be one cage with benches, a second cage blocked off from the first, and a third one. And at the bottom, when you could do it, there'd be a round hole like this. So to talk to them, you had to kneel down and kind of shout, through. But it would always, sometimes there'd be a lot of talk, but as soon as you began, it would quiet down. It was just amazing. And we would give them the information of the safe houses and also say a special prayer of protection, encourage them to walk together as they crossed the bridge going into Mexico. So meanwhile, there would be, at that time, it took about close to another 8 months, I think, or to a year. We then approached them again, and we were given permission to go into the deportation center. So now actually there are 3 of us who go into the visitation section, and the men or women sign up to see us to come in. And again, we give them the information about safe houses. We take phone numbers if we could call their families, because many times families do not know that their loved ones are being deported that day. It's kind of, it's an awful feeling. Friday for both Joanne and I is a very sad day. So we now are going in. Then Joanne, usually there's 2 people, another woman, Elena Segura from the Archdiocesan office. We have 2 people on the outside who are dealing with the families. And mostly that's a lot of hugging. You're there because they're breaking down and the little kids come in. It's a hard moment. But we are in. It didn't come easily. It took us doing all of it close to 2 years to accomplish that. But we don't take no for an answer. So now the fight continues. It always, well, I hope we're not always in a chaos, but Joanne mentioned our last program, which is the post-detention program for those released by ICE. And we call that PDAN, Post-Detention Network Accompaniment. And that grew out of lawyers, families, those in detention themselves, and even ICE agents who knew about us and would call us. And so Joanne and I, we'd be running to the bus station or down to 101 West Congress Parkway to pick up people who are released in the clothes that they were arrested in. But now with this program, we have 2 phases because again, we're big on team operation. So right now we have 5 teams that parallel each week, and there is a coordinator for each team. And they receive a call, the hotline. Either the detainee will call the person themselves, or a lawyer will call, or a family member will call. And the first phase would be the person released could probably go to another state that they themselves have family. So it would be getting them to a bus station, usually the Harrison Street Greyhound bus is right there, so we'd get them there. Get clothing for them. Sometimes there might be a special request, like Joanne's friend Albert, who was being released, and he said he was going to Kentucky, back to Kentucky, because he had a friend there. And he said, could I just stay and rest for 3 days and have a shower before I continue on? And indeed, that's what he did. We found him a spot in the Darth Center. So the second phase then, after taking care of those quick things that they're able to move on, is the second phase, which is a lot harder, and this is where our fighting is coming in. We're trying to get a building, and we thought this building was ready for rental. We're all set, but we found out that there are zoning issues now. And there are men and women being released who have no family, no place to go. Some of them do not speak the language very well, if at all, because we have a couple men from China who do not speak the language. And so they're here for their court dates. Some of them might be waiting for the decision on asylum or the U visa or some status. So what's happening now is we have to find people to house them. So right now we have 15 post-detainees who are in private homes being hosted, Catholic worker houses, intentional communities, and they're being cared for. So because we don't like to fight particularly, but if we have to, if we must, we will do it. And it's for our for the people whom we are working with. I just like to close with this little story that kind of will maybe explain why, as Joanne mentioned, we have now over 100 volunteers in all of these programs working on teams, whether it's at Broadview or in the post-detention or in the jail.
Or the court.
Or in the courts. So we have a lot in the courts too. Well, it happened that it's a rabbi story. And this rabbi brought his students together on Saturday morning, and he put the question to them. And he said, when does night turn into day? And there was a bit of silence, and they all kind of waited and were thinking, and a hand rose and said, Rabbi, it's when you can look out into the pasture and you're able to distinguish a sheep from a goat. He said, no, that's not the answer. And somebody else raised their hand and they said, when you can look out into the orchard and tell the peach tree from the apple tree. He said, no. And they said, well, finally, you tell us when night turns into day. And he said, it's when you can look into the eyes of every woman and man and see your sister and brother. Until that time, it is still night. And so I think that kind of explains, if all of those volunteers were here to speak to you today, I think that story would explain the feelings that they have toward our brothers and sisters, that it's a responsibility because we are one. We're just one family. Questions?
Now it's your turn.
It's your turn.
Well, I can lead off by, I think it's amazing that the legislation, the Access to Religious Ministry Act, passed unanimously through both houses of the General Assembly in the state of Illinois. And I wonder if you can talk about your experience of the sort of discord between the need for the law and the willingness of the legislature to pass it unanimously. Did that take a lot of convincing of the legislature, or are we living two different moral frameworks towards immigrants that are reflected in that distinction?
Well, it took a lot of negotiating because Fred Zhao wrote the law, and we lobbied, and the legislators would ask us a lot of questions. We were there so much that if we went down the back corridor of the House chamber, they'd say, oh, hi, sister, how you doing today? So they knew us, but it meant being there. But the ones we had to most negotiate with was the sheriffs, and they did not want us to get into the jail. And we were not going in for the criminal population, so really they weren't the ones over that. But we did have to do literally negotiating. And Fred would sit down with us because they looked on it as our bill and say, can you live with this if we take this out? But what always kills us in all of this, the one sheriff said, he was the head of the Sheriff's Association. He said, my aunt would kill me. She's a nun. If she knew I was fighting with nuns, well, then why are you? And everywhere we go when we're having the hard meetings with ICE, they would be at the end of these awful meetings, you know, where they were not wanting immigrants to have their rights. They'd say, well, you know, we're Catholic. And the same thing happened with this building after a horrible meeting with Cicero about the zoning. They ended up saying, we're all Catholic. So Brother Michael Gosh coordinates that post-detention program for us, and he was emailing. I said, attach the Pope's homily at Lampedusa, Sicily, which is now my biggest motivation. If you haven't read that, get it. And he went there because African refugees were trying to get there and died in the water. And he went there and he spoke about how we've lost our bearings. And when you lose your bearings, you don't look at the other one as your sister or brother. You look at them as an obstacle to your comfort. I don't know the words. They talked about this soap bubble we're living in that's causing this false security and creating a globalization of indifference. And all of that is just drives us more to do this. But we did have to negotiate. And actually, in the Senate, we were trying to get it into the veto session, and we passed it in the House in May, but then to get onto the Senate, we had sponsors, but it couldn't get on because, you know, the budget stuff at the end of the session. And so the summer came and we're working with our two Senate sponsors, and Jackie Collins said, what you need to do is bring Emil Jones' pastor. Now, Emil Jones was the Senate president, and we happened to know a Catholic priest was Emil Jones' pastor, and he came with us. And first they're saying, oh, Father, he's not here yet. Then we go marching back, oh, Father, he has to get this thing started. I said, you mean he doesn't have courtesy enough to greet his pastor who told you, called to say he'd be here today? So this officious, well-dressed woman came out saying, well, I will take Father and the two sisters. And we had this 20 people with Muslim headdress, rabbis, everybody, and of course they all just followed us. So we all went right down on the Senate floor, and Emil Jones saw Father Flynn. He said, oh, Father, I know I haven't been to church lately. And he hugged him, and they chatted a bit, and then Jim pushed us out. And I explained the importance of this, because when people said, you'll never get it in the veto session, we don't say never. So then Pat got in his face, and you said,
you have the power to do this. And he just kind of stepped back. I said, no, this is not a joke that you, and he's a powerful man. You have the power to do this. So he stopped, and then he called Iris Martinez, who was on the floor, and she came over, and they began to confer, and then this whole tribe of us walked out, And they incorporated into a shell bill, and it had already been read a couple times, and they would put this in. So all it needed then was the third reading, and
But we had to testify
we-
first to get it out of
and
committee.
out of the committee, right? That was
Yeah.
later on. There's so many. It's hard to remember it all.
But
you
yes,
know.
we had to do a lot of work. But the miracle is it passed.
A lot of prayer went
Yes,
into this too.
Yes, because we feel that vigil at Broadview, where this all started with one lawyer and the two of us, is a powerhouse, because every day, and we didn't change anything when they had a vice from Washington, from our place, Senator Durbin. We prayed for ICE and the staffs of the jail that they treat our sisters and brothers with dignity and respect. We pray for legislators that they'll open their minds and hearts, and so we do that every week. And people, honestly, 30 to 50 people are there every week, and some of them are our ministers from the other programs. By minister, I mean lay people, not Catholic ministers.
Clerics or
But a lot of them, that's their ministry, to come to Broadview on Friday, and you can be there in a snowstorm, and we will have a group of people, or pouring rain, or hot sun. And we have a group, we work with JCUA, the Jewish Council on Urban Affairs, and every month in the summer they bring a group of their youth who stand there through the Catholic Rosary, and then they offer their prayer at the end. And once a month now, fighting with our lawyer, who's very Catholic, we got ecumenical service once a month with Jewish, Muslim, and Christian prayer. But it all took a lot of fighting, and negotiating to get that bill passed. Other questions or comments?
What's the support like that you've gotten from immigrants who have been here longer, who maybe have documentation? And what's the response been from citizens as well in the community to your work?
It's interesting. I spoke to a woman recently who shocked me. She's a Mexican immigrant but has status. And I don't know, even now remember who it was, but I remember the shock when she said, well, they're all coming in here illegally. What are you talking about? But when we were testifying in the executive committee to initially get this into the House, our against people were the sheriffs, and we call her
the Minute Maid.
the Minute Maid, because she works with the Minutemen.
And
And she's going on about, you don't know who they'll bring in there, the doorman, the usher, the jihad. And she did not want to send there for the detainees. And one of the representatives said, what nationality are you? She said, I'm Mexican American. He said, well, why don't you want your people to get this comfort? And she started all over again. He said, but you shoot people. The man with her, who hadn't said a word, said up, he said, we're the Chicago Minutemen. In other words, we don't shoot. That happens on the border. It's like, oh, great. But that amazes me when people with status now don't want to see other people get it. But that's rare, I think.
yeah, I think there in Chicago right now we have what is called the Migratoria Pastoral, which was formed by this Elena Segura in the Archdiocese, and she has some 80 parishes, and these are groups of immigrant, maybe those who have status and those who have not status, but they work together to help their brothers and sisters in terms of housing and whatever the problems might be. But you will find that every so often, they'll say they're just coming in for, for the good life. Can you imagine crossing the Arizona desert? Every time I talk to people in the detainees in the jail, and I ask them how they come over, and those who have come through the desert, I can't even fathom that, what that means. And they do that because of their children and those they have left behind within their countries. So that isn't, as Joanne mentioned, that's not a normal response. Anyway, what we have noted.
Now, on
In
the
the
other
Anglo
hand-
parishes, that's another story.
Goodness.
But there is a slow change coming with that too. There's such a disconnect between the pulpit, the gospel, and those who sit in the pews. Something happened that connection was not made down through the ages. That the people aren't fired, or we don't see our brothers and sisters, when we look into their eyes. So it depends. I don't know if that answers your question or not.
A
but
lot of anti-immigrant
yeah, it's a lot of-
sentiment.
and hate.
Yeah,
You
that's
know,
what
that's what's
bothers me.
scary. That's
Really hate, but we've been asked to come into non-Catholic parishes. I've given homilies in a Baptist Associated Church, in the Unitarian Universalist Church, in the Lutheran Church. We met with the group. And so it's all denominations. And I said, too bad we can't preach in our own church, but I really enjoy doing it in these other
Yeah.
churches that invite us. But along with what Pat's saying about how they come, we had the privilege this summer of being part of the nuns on the bus for immigration, and our part was the border. And we got on in San Antonio and got off in San Diego. And when the Senate was debating the bill at the time, and we're hearing about this border security, oh my goodness, when you see what's already happening there and how it's impacting the people who live there, their land's being taken there. In San Diego, they told us they just wiped out 30 ecology laws to build the third fence. But we're on the Pasquayaki Indian Reservation outside of Tucson. And one of the men, they go out into the desert to see if there's anybody needing help. And he went out and he saw a woman curled up under a plant. Now, when we were in that area, it was 115 degrees. We were in the migrant camps, and they were out in those fields. And he said he saw this woman, and he went over and he turned her over. She was dead, and clutched in her arm was her baby. Now, why would she be doing that except she wanted this child to have a better life? So how we can't, as human beings, understand that. In San Antonio, our very first event, Representative Pete Gallegos spoke, and he had a prepared speech, but his 8-year-old son, and they let the speakers out in the sun and had all the bystanders under a tent. So we were really hot, and he's in his suit coat, and his little boy came up and hugged him. He said, I have a speech prepared, but I can't give it because, excuse me, the day he was born made me understand the immigrant issue and why parents would go through what they do to come to this country to make a better life for the children. He said, I would do anything to take care of this child. And I understand now why these people are coming here to make a better life, like that woman with her child cradled in her arms. So why we can't convince our country that this is the reality and that we've caused a lot of the problem by our NAFTA and CAFTA and our own desire to control industry and economy, that we're destroying the economy of our brothers and sisters. And by no means is this an Hispanic issue. In the jail, we meet people from every country in the world. And in our post-detention, actually, right now we only have 2 Spanish speakers of the 15. We have Rwanda, Nigeria, Burundi, China, Iran. We've had Iran. So people from all over the country, all over the world are experiencing these same issues. So.
And we have to keep reminding ourselves too, like it's scary. It's when corporations rule the world, and the lobbyists, or the drones that are flying over the border. Well, that's money. It's money for the corporations. Or we see the fences going up, and it's frightening. Now this another war. We have to look at that, and again, to remember. I just think with the celebration of Martin Luther King, if we could only all imbibe that too, because there's so much racism also in the whole immigration issue, that if we could only see that how does he say that? That something like it all depends. Our sharing, it doesn't depend on the color of our skin, but on the content of one's character. If we could only take Martin Luther King, he was a great theologian, I think, and just imbibe a lot of what he has said, and the way he lived his life. I mean, he gave his life for his brothers and sisters. But it's frightening. Now, I find it, and you just have to keep moving along. We all have to get out and work for peace, too.
And we
It's part
always
of it.
say to groups, especially of students, younger people, obviously we've lived a lot of our life, but don't ever say, well, what can I do? I'm only one person, or we're only a small group. Think about us. I mean, sometimes when I think of standing there that cold day in January, now we're a corporation, a 501c3, we have a couple hundred volunteers, we're doing all of this. And it only came because as people of faith, but you don't have to be a person of faith as a human being, you realize there's injustice, and that if, as Roy always says, if you don't speak, you're complicit with the system that's broken and evil. And so to just not, as the Pope said, who is weeping for these men and women that died coming for freedom? We've lost our ability to weep for one another. And if it's not me, I don't have to worry about it. So, you know, at your stage in life, and if you're going into law, I mean, that's, we couldn't exist without lawyers. We work with the National Immigrant Justice Center. Every week we forward all our legal concerns to them, but, and Roy is wonderful, but that's so very important, and we hear those stories from our people all the time. My family paid a lawyer. They remortgaged the house, and he didn't do anything. He never showed up in court, doesn't answer the phone calls. that's criminal. That's a crime. And you know, oftentimes the immigration lawyer knows that they can't win this case, but they'll
yeah.
keep taking the money, and then the person is deported and the family's devastated. But we work with DePaul University Law School, and that's been a great experience. And we're saying that Pat even got to testify for one of the students, and that was exciting. And they won the case.
Yeah, that was real exciting. I had met this man that well, he'd come every other Tuesday because it depends on the pods as they come in. So I got to know his story, and we'd write a lot of letters too. Write a letter to the judge and send it to the detainee, and they put it with their papers. And so there was 2 young law students from DePaul, and they asked when they had read the letter, and the judge got the letter, if I would testify. And indeed, I said, oh, yes, I would. So we went to the court, and well, first of all, the young law student, questioned me, and I answered the questions and so on. Then I don't know what I was thinking. I thought it was all over, so I started to get up, and they said, oh, no, no. So the ICE attorney had to question me then, and so I guess she thought that I was prepped very well by this student, and so the ICE attorney just said, well, how do you know all of this? I said, I meet with him, very often, and he has told me all of this. And then the one question, she said, now, if he is released and goes out then and he has his freedom, what do you think will happen? And I said, well, I really don't know that, to be truthful, but I only know his character from the time that I've been able to share with him. So I said, I hope and pray, that he's able to put his life together. So that was it. So then later on, we were on our way to Indiana, and we got the call that we won the case. So that was a good feeling, and I know it was for the law students too.
Right.
They were real excited.
I just got a call too about 2 weeks ago from a summer intern at clinic in Washington, and she said, your name is in this file and your phone number. So I remembered the story, and I forget, I think he had to come back, and she was looking for a lawyer, and I said, well, we work with NIJC, so she was going to call Elizabeth that we work with. But those are neat connections we have, and we just enjoy working with groups like yours. So thank you ever so much. We're open to more questions, but I also know you have time limits, and that's good for us.
We are running short on time. If anyone has a very brief question, we can probably have one more. Yes. Well,
maybe you can tell us a little bit about the visits themselves and the exchange and conversation that occurs and transformation. Maybe.
In the jail?
Mm-hmm.
Well, we're only there seeing the men every other week. We see the women every week. And I'll just give you a story of a young woman from Somalia who's in our post-detention now. She was picked up at O'Hare Airport, and she was devastated. She couldn't speak the language. She's put in an orange suit, put in the pod with these other women, but they take care of each other. And about 3 women brought her to us and said, she needs help. So 2 women sat down with her, couldn't speak in her language, but we can touch them. And we always tell our workers the most important thing is the ministry of presence. By the time she left that day, her whole body had changed. She came faithfully every single week. Now we were able to get her out. She lived with the religious community for quite a while. She got her work permit. She has a job. Now she's living with a friend. If the lawyers tell us if we weren't in there, they wouldn't even know these stories. So they were able to get her out. So that's one case I can think of where there was a big change. Anyone? I mean, I have a lot, but
I think it's overwhelming the gratitude that people have. The last Tuesday I was there, there was a young man who was just brought in the Friday before. This is Tuesday now. And it's just kind of hard then when they break down. And they really, the men will break down and cry. But you can imagine that he said, I never committed a crime. You know, I didn't do anything. And you can usually tell those that come in with the bracelets that are blue means that whatever it is, if it's something with immigration, or they might have been picked up because the tail light was broken, that really happens, or they were stopped, it was a racial kind of thing, they were stopped on the street and they couldn't produce papers. But he left his wife and his 3 children, and he doesn't know now what's going to happen to him. He cannot afford a lawyer, and so he just wept. But he did talk, and there is something, again, we call it the theology of presence, by being there with them. And then he just asked if I would bless him at the very end. So I do. I put my hands on and bless him, and we give them maybe some reading material. Mary Knoll has a lot of magazines and different things. But I wrote a letter then to the judge and called his wife, and we just hope that NIJC, then I call NIJC, Elizabeth especially, and I'll say, please call him and just talk to him anyway to see what can be done. Because you don't know what's going to happen. They could deport him. He's done nothing. And he's leaving a wife and 3 children. I think sometime in deportation, they're real distraught. And I've had this happen over and over again. And the person will say to me, I'm leaving my wife and 5 children, but I'll be back.
and we say,
And it scares you, you know, because if they are come back, and I mean, that's the worst sin you can commit, is if you come back. It's a federal offense then, and they can be jailed for years. But any number of times, you know, they'll say that I'll be back. And you can understand why. You can understand why.
it makes a difference. And when they're leaving, they're walking out, they often turn around and say, thanks for coming, for driving down here. We had a man from Burma, I think he was, and he told me, from my cell, I can see the parking lot. And every Tuesday, I watch. And when I see your group coming, even if I don't get to go that day, it makes me feel so much better to know you're in the building. So, and the best thing, you know, when even the first year we got in there, I was always getting called to the principal's office. The officers reported us for doing things we shouldn't do. And the lieutenant would call me and say, you know, you were blah, blah, because of course we're on camera too while we're in there. And the officers were hostile, and they'd say, why do you want to visit them? Why don't you visit the other part of the prison? Well, because the law we got passed is to visit them. And we give them $10 for their commissary account if they don't have money. And some of the officers would say, oh, they're just coming here for the money. I said, you know what, that's okay, because we want them to feel by our visit that they are human beings. And if you have money to make a choice, that makes you feel like a human being. And they can use phone calls, as you probably know, are ridiculous. But they can make one call with that $10. And if they can call their wife and talk to her for 3 minutes it means the world to them. So I say, that's okay. But if you stand, my job, I do the attendance, so I get to talk to everybody a little bit. And then I write the checks. Now they give us the commissary list. Before it was like, you can't see this, don't look at this. And I'd tell the officer the name, and he'd say, he needs money. No, he doesn't. Now they give me the list, and I look at it. But from where I sit then, watching this conversation, you know they're there for more than $10. So it makes a great big difference.
There's one thing, too, that I just want to mention again in terms of the presence, and it does make a difference. We also believe it's easier with the immigrant population to see them as our brothers and sisters. But the correctional officers, ICE agents, and so on, that's quite a bit harder. But bye-bye. But if we really believe that they too are our brothers and sisters. And so in the jail or at the deportation facility, wherever we are, we make it a real effort, always, never to lose it, and to always be extremely respectful and kind, kill them with kindness, as it were. And it works. There has been a transformation at the jail. I mean, they could not be nicer to us. They're glad when we come. And I think it's got to make a difference in the pods. It has to when those men and women go back. There is a difference. And there's a complete, from the, not the chief, the sheriff on down. They'll come if we have a large group, bring our volunteers together. We've invited the chief, and he's come, and his deputy chiefs to address the group too. So we really work at that, and we've got to believe in all our brothers and sisters, no matter who they are.
And then, because we've done that, when we see issues that we don't like, we can communicate. And we don't come on as the enemy. And the same with ICE. And just when Mr. Wong was at Broadview with Senator Durbin, he literally called our office. We acknowledged him and told his boss from DC he's good to work with, that he's fair and honest and follows the law. But if he'll listen to us, and if he can make it work, he does. And then we acknowledged him when we introduced everybody. He called us at our office to say, I would be remiss if I didn't thank you for today and what you said. I said, well, it was very sincere. He said, but you didn't have to do it. And he said, I like to work with your group because you don't just holler at me and tell me what's wrong. You tell me when something is good, and you thank me. And no other group does that. And it's that kind of treating them with that kind of respect that we've built a relationship of trust. And that's how we get into all these places. And now the officers have mellowed and want to help us and thank us for coming. So it's worth all the fighting, but sometimes it's been nice if it would have been easier. So anyway, and this I hope to get off next Monday, but it's nice to use in a couple of talks now. So thank you very much.
And hope you all have a great school year, and be super lawyers or theologians, whoever is here, whatever. Thank you.
Thank you.